We did run out last time.
Absolutely, I'll do anything for a buck.
Oh yeah, just a butt. The crowbar in the wall.
It would have been cheaper. Yeah.
Okay, it's 5:30 according to Verizon time, so I'm going to call this work session to order. Remind everybody to take turn your phones to silent or vibrate, and then let's all stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll have Christine take the roll, and as she does, I want to know that Councilman Strebe called earlier and said he would not be able to be here tonight, so go ahead and take the roll.
Councilmember Strebe? Councilmember Burke?
Here.
Councilmember Dalby?
Here.
Councilmember Rowe?
Here.
Councilmember Stevens?
Here.
Mayor Lazio?
Here. Need approval for tonight's agenda?
So move. Second.
Councilmember Burke?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
We always give citizens a chance to make comments on any item on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wants to address an item on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. At this time, I'd like to introduce Larry Seals, Director of Public Works, and Larry's going to give us a little introduction and introduce his guests. Larry, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. What we're here for is to kind of recap how we got to this point, give a little bit of history, cover our compliance schedule that we're currently under with IDNR and EPA, and then roll into the next phase of our project, which is phase 8. I do want to just start out saying that how we got to this point. In '99, we had a subdivision that was wanting to build, and when we submitted the sewer permit to IDNR, they would not issue a permit pending a study and a plan of action. That was in 1999. From that point, we started looking at the system as a whole, the collection system, how we could do sewer separation and elimination throughout the city. As Ted will probably cover in part of his presentation, at that time, I believe there was 11 cities in the state that were built as CSO communities. And again, just more for the public, a CSO is a combined sewer outfall, which means you have a one pipe system for storm and sanitary. Under low flow, all the sanitary goes to the treatment plant. Anytime you have a rain event that exceeds the capacity of your collection system, then there were outlets to the river that would let the higher flows go directly to the river, including whatever remnants of the wastewater was still in the system and being discharged during that rain event. So we've been through the first 7 phases because the compliance schedule that we negotiated with DNR was set up into a 10-phase program. It was a 25-year compliance schedule. That's something that we spent multiple years negotiating with the DNR and EPA. Actually, it was a 5-year process, slightly longer, more like 6 from the initial stages. We were very fortunate through the action of Ted, his group, a lot of the legislators, council, the mayors at the time, a lot of action with our state and federal folks in order to get a longer compliance schedule, a little bit of negotiations too. We're just going to go right into the phase 8, start up the PowerPoint presentation. And I'll introduce Ted at this point. He'll come up and we'll just cover the information jointly, and then he can introduce his staff. At the end of this, we want to wrap up with the financials. You know, how can we fund this project? Come on up, Ted, if you want. This is the actual outfall at Blake's Branch. This is under low flow. It actually drops in a lower chamber, goes to the treatment plant, and then the high ones, that top gate actually opens up and can discharge. I think that's a 5x7, so you can see the volume that we're seeing to the river. All right. Ted, you want to go ahead and I'll let you kind of jump in?
Sure. And first of all, I want to introduce our team. We have Randy Johnson. He'll be our project manager. We have Steve Thompson, he'll be in charge of quality control communication, and a familiar face, our senior process engineer or system engineer, Todd Peniston. We got hired originally 2004. And so like I've told the mayor, this is kind of like my second hometown because I'm from Valley Junction originally. And so over the last 15 years or so, you folks have accomplished a heck of a lot. And what Larry's saying is that even though it seemed like at the time that a 25-year compliance schedule was an inordinate amount of time, in reality, as we're starting to look at the next phase, which is supposed to be completed in 2025, because of the magnitude of the project, there's some 1,600 acres involved. There's about 800 acres that is heavily populated. And between a pipe to the plant, which we'll get into in a minute, and a pipe along paralleling the CSO, and beyond that, all of the side streets, there's probably almost 15 miles of pipe and potentially about 230 blocks of paving. And so if you look at a typical community, paving program of 10 blocks might be a huge program. So this is a big bite. And because of it, there's a lot of complexity to it. And so we've been working through it with all phases. The one thing I will say is that I think that past mayors and council and staff have been excellent to work with in terms of pursuing grants. And the idea of all of this is to try to keep the rates the best we can for the residents. But as you can see, that when we start looking at combined systems, go ahead and flip the next one. If you're familiar with this, go back to the first one, I guess. All right. Probably most of the residential streets, in the middle of the street, there's a manhole. And the idea of a combined sewer system is a one pipe system. And so the wastewater and the stormwater go into that pipe, which goes down to Blake's Branch, which is in the valley. The way they go ahead and flip it. And that's just kind of a graphic that goes on. And so, as Larry said, throughout the nation, this was actually part of the Clean Water Act. And it wasn't until about the 1990s that the feds actually started getting serious about this. And so in a lot of ways, you were ahead of the curve in terms of compliance. Go ahead. And that's some of the things that we've come up with. I will say that, Larry kind of talked a little bit about the 25-year schedule. The initial offering from EPA was 15 years. And 15 years, if we calculated all the costs were going to be incurred, you were looking at sewer rates of about $130 a month. And we said that's unacceptable. And so through a team effort with other cities in Iowa, our congressional delegation, and a lot of leadership, we were able to negotiate a 25-year schedule. That's the first one in Iowa. And as I work nationwide, it's very attractive. Most people didn't receive that. So that's a good thing. The key to it is you got to stay on schedule. And as Larry said, for phase 8, completed by 2025. Go ahead. Again, more of the same. The thing we need to emphasize is that it is a compliance schedule. We have a discharge permit, which is issued every 5 years, and attached to that is a long-term control plan, which is a federal mandate. And so we need to really plan for it. And the reason that you've received so many grants, we'll talk about that in a moment, is you've been diligent in staying with the schedule. And that makes you very attractive for grants and help. Go ahead. And we'll have Todd. This is some of the progress, some of the history. Todd?
Thank you. Going back to the last slide, we'll kind of start with that. That is a brick sewer, obviously, but it's located down on Finley Avenue. It stretches the entire area down through there all the way over towards the Finley Avenue pump station over by John Deere. And that was from the phase 2 project. We've had about 7 different projects on the south side. This is happened to be phase 2. And believe it or not, back before we started these projects, that pipe would flow full and be actually lifting manhole lids off just because of a 1-inch rain. So that was fairly commonplace back then. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how successful these projects have been to take a pipe such as that was flowing full, and now we're down to about 18 inches on a typical day. So that's a pretty good success. But as
about 520 basement backups before we
correct.
These
Yeah, and that's the reason looking back is why we started on the south side is because of basement backups. And one of the kind of the design points that we did on phase one was we had a large 8x6 box culvert that goes down Sheridan Avenue. If you can kind of picture that area down there. And one of the items that we did was we actually wrapped those joints of that box culvert with some felt and then some additional joint material on top of that. But about every third joint of that pipe, we left the rubber joint part of it off and just left the filter fabric there, and actually kind of creates a little bit of a glorified sump pump basically. So it collects all the groundwater as it comes up and puts it into the storm sewer and runs it down to the lagoon. So that way we actually dried up quite a few basements as part of that project as well. So, but as we progress through those projects, as Ted mentioned, we did have quite a bit of grant money combined in with the loan dollars in those projects. Phase one had some STAG grant money, which was the state and tribal assistance grant, which back then was more or less an earmark that were kind of gone away the last few years. But I think talking to Ted, it sounds like those may be coming back in some form or another. And then we also had CDBG grants as part of those projects as well. So if you want to flip to the next, yeah, the lines in color there are the different phases on the south side. And then on the north side of the river was obviously the large FEMA project that we finished about a year and a half ago. That was quite successful with 100% grant funding on that particular project. So as we move forward, the next project in sequence in the long-term control plan would be the Blake's Branch project, which Randy will kind of get into here in a minute. But that just kind of gives you an update of kind of where we're at, where we started and where we're at now. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Randy.
Yeah. Can you show the next slide? Yeah. I was going to let you talk about
Okay, sure. Yeah, this slide here actually shows the costs for each of those phases that we've completed so far. It shows the CDBG grants for each individual phase as well as the STAG grants. And then the I-Jobs, that was, I believe, about an $800,000 grant at the time back in the late 2008, 2009 timeframe.
Todd, I don't mean to interrupt you, but my eyesight's pretty good, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure anybody can read that.
Any way to blow that up or
Total
not?
cost is $41,830.
Correct.
And grants received were $27,924. So that's about what, 60-70% of the.
Yeah, which is very, very, very good news for Ottumwa. And then we finished up, like I said, with the combination of CDBG and FEMA grant on the last project. So, thanks, Randy.
Good evening, Randy Johnson. I was going to talk a little bit more about the Blake's Branch sewer project itself. So I'll just kind of give you an overall, I guess, map of it. And then I was going to pass it over to Chad and he'll kind of give you a drone video to show you the area that this Blake's Branch takes. So right there, Blake's Branch, this is phase 8 of the long-term plan. The one thing, the shaded yellow there just kind of shows you how that drainage of Blake's Branch is. So it's like Ted was saying, about 1,600 acres that drains down this channel to the river. Slide. This was a nice document that Chad got for me. Kind of shows the brick sewer that was built back in the early 1900s, about 8 foot wide, 10 foot tall. It's 2 layers of brick, has that oval. You'll see some more pictures of it, but it's about 9,000 feet in length. These are some pictures from Larry and Chad's crew going through the Blake's Branch tunnel, so they're able to go through and videotape it. So pretty good shape for a brick sewer from back in the early 1900s. So again, talking about overall about 1,700 acres for this Blake's Branch drainage. The Blake's Branch we're going to talk about is more the purple area, the southern area. But when we design for our new system, we're going to make sure we encompass all that drainage. So any future developments, we make sure we have that capacity to handle anything future. Again, so this slide is really showing you what's highlighted there is the Blake's Branch, is the box, that 8 foot by 10 foot box. And you're going to let me, I'll point the laser. So the Blake's Branch, let's see if it reaches that far. Seems like it blurs out. But I'll just the southern part, is kind of goes right to the river. Ted was just kind of showing the map. There's a better, if, afterwards, we can be around if you want to talk that out. But also on that, we kind of have a layout of what our future, what we're thinking we want to do, or the future plan of the separation of that. But before we get to that, I think the next slide is, do I have it here? I think it's for Chad to kind of give you guys a little bit of an aerial view of the drone flight of this.
So we prepared a video. It's about 9 minutes in length. It's showing the Lakes Branch, and it does a pretty good job of showing, some of the obstacles we'll have to face, some of the challenges that we'll be seeing with the project. Also does a good job showing the general alignment of the sewer. Lakes Branch is approximately 9,000 feet in length. The video is broken up into several sections, starting at the Des Moines River. This first section will stop at the communication tower. And as Larry explained, this is the Lakes Branch combined sewer overflow. So when the Lakes Branch is overwhelmed, this is where that raw material is released into the Des Moines River. I pause throughout the video now and then, showing the approximate alignment of the Lakes Branch. Keep in mind that yellow line is representing a box sewer. It varies in dimension, but give or take 8 foot by 10 foot in size. The alignment, we had questions as far as the alignment. The plans are back in the late 1800s, construction in the early 1900s, so almost 120 years old. We had a number of areas that we weren't 100% confident where that sewer actually went. So Kevin Sylvester and the sewer maintenance crews, they've been in this box a lot. They've been doing televising inspections. They've also been able to correctly locate this sewer. So what we're showing you here on these maps is a very good idea of where this sewer is in fact running. Off to our left, we have Vine Street. The top of the screen is Main Street. The blue building is one of Wimco Tank's buildings. You can actually see the difference in the moisture content. You have this kind of lighter area. The box is only a couple feet deep through here. So that is actually the box sewer that we're looking at. And we're coming up on our first point of interest. This is Main Street. Again, we're looking at a give or take an 8 foot by 10 foot box sewer, and it does in fact run directly beneath this building. On the back side of this is a real steep driveway, and if you walk down that driveway, you can actually see the top of that box sewer. Any questions or comments, feel free to ask.
And remember, late 1800s, what Ottumwa looked like. There's no flood wall, there's no levees. And so this was an open ditch, and they would literally just lay the pipe, build the pipe in the open ditch, and then cover it up. A couple rows of brick is how they built it.
So we're on Birch Street, we're crossing 2nd Street. Directly beneath us, we have the box sewer roughly running down the center of Birch. The further north we progress, that box sewer migrates over to the east right away. Approaching Plum Street. Off here to the top left is the high school. You can see the shadow of the high school. About a block further to the right is Wilson School. To give just an idea of where we're at. This next stretch is covering Plum Street to Jefferson Street. And here we have Birch Street, Plum Street. Lakes Branch does in fact run underneath this building and runs underneath the corner of this house. It would appear that this house had an addition We actually have a picture of this from the earlier slide. We have another sewer that ties into that box directly underneath that house. Top left is the overflow parking for the high school. We're approaching Center Avenue. The video kind of speaks through here, but this Blake's branch does go out just the corner of this house, pretty much directly beneath those big trees, cuts across in the timbered area, and we're now approaching Grant. Very top side of the screen, we can start seeing traffic on Jefferson Street. The alignment goes right in front of this property, this house. Cuts underneath the corner. This is the BP gas station on Jefferson. That Blake's branch runs right underneath the corner of this building. And again, with our sewer maintenance crews, we have a good bead on where this line does run. It is basically the edge of the box sewer is parallel with the edge of this garage. We're approaching Jefferson Park. Some of you have maybe driven by and noticed a rise down this bottom. It's kind of a bottom. There's kind of a rise through here. That is actually covered over the top of Blake's branch. It's only a couple feet deep through here. East Court below us. Paralleling Jefferson, heading north, we have Lincoln Street. The sewer runs just about the same thing as that previous garage, right on the edge of this garage. And up here it gets a little interesting. So at this point, we're riding on the back side of those homes. I'll pause that for a second. That sewer cuts between those two properties and now starts running between the homes and the streets. We have a manhole in this driveway, and our crews were actually able to find another manhole just only feet off the front of this property. So that box sewer does in fact run right between those two properties and starts running down the face of these homes. It would appear that this porch is over the box. We have, again, parallel in Jefferson. We're about to cross Maple. Hy-Vee Drugtown to our right. Again, Hy-Vee Drugtown to the right. We have the BP on Penn and Jeff and the Lighthouse Plaza. Again, cutting cross country. Crossing Pennsylvania. Here on the top left corner, we're looking at Green and Woodland. The pilot gets a little confused here, so we'll fast forward a little bit. Another item to note is this was taken about 2 months ago and they're still there. And so this drainage is an open ditch. And you can see where that frozen ice just disappears. And it's disappearing into the inlet of that Blake's Branch sewer.
And there's probably a couple of sections of ground upstream.
I'm gonna go on back one. So wanted to talk to you a little bit more of our concept plan that we developed. You know, we already talked about, we had about 1,600 acres. You know, we designed a separate sewer system. So the plan is to separate the combined sewer, have a separate sanitary sewer, and continue to use Blake's box as a storm sewer. So we kind of looked at the layout, looked at aerial photographs, some LiDAR, some contour maps to come up with a concept, and tried to avoid areas where we would have conflicts going under houses. Tried to get it out more into street right-of-ways, but still be able to combine, you know, the laterals on each side of that branch that tie into that box. So we're still trying to capture that whole area. So this kind of shows you that 9,000 lineal feet. So, you know, getting close to 2 miles of pipe run that Chad was just showing with the drone flight. Before I get into more of this, do you want to go to 2 more slides forward? So what we talked about is this is now on Main Street, where you see that top left is Main and what is that, Birch up there at the top. And so our Blake's Branch, our new sanitary sewer would come to that point, and the plan is then to take that new sewer, that collected sewer, and get it to the wastewater treatment facility. So that would be a separate sanitary run that would start at that Main and Birch, go down Main Street to Iowa Street, kind of cross Main and go down Maple, cross under the railroad tracks, go under the Highway 63 to the wastewater treatment facility. So that would be our preliminary run. We think we can do that by gravity. There was some thoughts with previous, you know, designs that we'd have to do a pump station and force main, but we believe we may have enough gravity, enough fall to get a gravity sewer, which would be a lot nicer. So this is kind of what we're envisioning for phase 1. And I know, or you want to?
Well, I just want to jump in. One of the things with this design, because over the years it's kind of evolved of the alignment of how to get it to the treatment plant, we'll be able to pick up a lot of this gravity system and connect it directly in here. That routes this away from the CSOs, and of course that's always the goal. We'll also be able to pick up, and this is just an added benefit of this line, this area had been separated but recombined on Main Street, so you didn't really gain, but it's the same principle we've used around town on different streets like Maple or Pennsylvania, where when you are doing the work, you do separate, and then you try to design later to pick that up. We're actually going to pick up and come back to the Blake's Branch box. We'll pick up as much of this storm as we can and directly take it over here. That also helps this area currently that's overloaded. This is one of the few areas in town where under a really intense rain, we do have ponding in a couple of areas. That'll help alleviate that. So that's kind of the side benefit. And you get it to the river gravity without pumping it, which reduces your overall expense over time.
One quick question. What's the location approximately? I mean, you can see where the sewer plant is, but to your extreme left and top, where's the, yeah.
That's Birch and Main, basically right there.
Birch and Main, travel down Main to Iowa Street, then cross Main south to get onto Maple, then travel along Maple to, I think there's like a nice little crossing area, a cul-de-sac that then we can get to the south side of the railroad tracks and continue on. And yeah, thanks, Larry. That's one thing we were making sure is that our sanitary sewer is deep enough to intercept some of those lines. And also, since we have that street opened up at Iowa Street, to put in a new storm pipe that goes back towards Blake's Branch and combine that. So we're getting that added benefit of separating that storm and and sanitary, and then also by intercepting along there, keeping those pipes at an elevation that can intercept all those laterals that are going north. So that would be what we're kind of considering as a phase 1 project, get this in place. For the phase 2, Larry, you got that? You want to go back up to the, back to the Blake's. So then what we would do, and we got a better map here. I know it was kind of hard to put it all in one, but there's a couple different colors on the slide. There's a yellow color, and the yellow color is the existing Blake's Branch box at 8 foot by 10. And then there's a purple line on there, and that's what we're anticipating where we can place a brand new sanitary sewer, a separate sewer pipe. Now coming along there, there's going to be some areas that we either need to go above the box or below the box to capture both sides of that box that is currently combined. And then also there could be the possibility, the one spot that Chad was showing where the box goes right along the front of those houses, we may have to put a small pipe in that box to capture what is the sanitary that's on those houses. I'm not sure there's a better way to capture, because I'm sure it just goes straight down into that box. We're not going to try to go underneath foundations and redirect sanitary services.
Not to interrupt, but that location to the south, that's Blake's Branch then, the one you can see here on the screen?
Yes, that goes to the river.
Right, and one more time, it doesn't indicate here, the apex, the very top of that chart. What approximately street, yeah, there you go.
That is the end of the box culvert above Pennsylvania.
Above Pennsylvania, where Chad showed where that
Right.
the water would go just directly into that. So that's what we're kind of considering as a phase 2 project. So the phase 3, if you want to move forward a couple clicks, Larry. Another one. One more. So what I show here, or what our slide shows here, we have different colored areas, and that's just to be able to, attack these in different bites. So now that we have the backbone or infrastructure in place, now we got to separate those side streets, the laterals. So right now, like Ted was talking and Larry talking, you have one pipe in the side street that collects both the stormwater and the sanitary water. So what we are anticipating, the pipes that we believe are there would continue to serve as sanitary, and what we would construct would be a new storm. If you look at some of the sizes that we see, we believe those pipes are a little undersized for the storm water. So this way we'll construct a new storm pipe that will connect to the box. So the existing pipe would connect to our new sanitary sewer. So once we have those separation, we have our new storm pipe, our new intakes, that can go to the box. Now we'll plug the old storm intakes into our existing pipe and just continue to use that as sanitary. That's most of the time that we believe that'll work, but there is going to be instances where the sanitary sewer is collapsed or is in terrible shape. We'll probably have to do a new sanitary pipe. And then there's some areas where I think we have some pretty large 42-inch pipes that are existing going to the Blake's Branch, and that may be sized large enough for stormwater. So in those instances, we would probably want to put a sanitary. So a lot to take in, but what each one of these colored areas are showing is like area A is the gold. That would be kind of the first area we think we would want to attack, separate the storm and sanitary, connect them to either Blake's Branch if it's storm, or the new sanitary if it's a sanitary pipe. And that way we'll just work our way up north and keep tackling each street. And with that, with us doing those separations, we will be requiring probably to repave those streets, because we're going to tear those streets up to do this work.
Yeah, most likely, we'll need to talk to the water groups. They come up with agreements because their water mains are probably as old as the sanitary. And So if you kind of think about the complete rebuild on a neighborhood basis, that's for 230 some blocks. That's the impact. That's really, look at the overall cost. All of the sites here collectively, CSOs from the bottom of the watershed, so that does bring the gravity. But in reality, you have to rebuild quite a bit of infrastructure in order to separate.
So if you can move to the next slide. So the next slide just kind of gives you a little bit more facts of each of the phases that we're talking about. Phase 1 was construction of the sanitary sewer from Blake's Branch to the wastewater treatment facility. Kind of gives you, the approximate lineal footage of new pavement or a new sanitary pipe, but it does give you approximately how much pavement would be replaced. And we put in there, 15 blocks. I think these are a little bit larger, maybe about 12 blocks of new pavement. And then just shows that there's approximately 110 parcels along that alignment that we may need some kind of easement for, if it's temporary or permanent. This first phase, I would anticipate more temporary because we're going to keep this in the right of way, try to maintain this in the right of way so we're not going on to private property to obtain permanent easements. Phase 2 was the separate sanitary sewer along Blake's Branch, that 9,000 feet. Approximately 46 lineal feet of new pavement or 16 blocks of pavement. Because you've seen some of that, we will be, not on the road. Some of it will be in some of those either alleyways or like park areas. And that had about 220 parcels that will maybe require some kind of easement. Some of these, this one may get a little trickier, may more challenges because we may need to have to get some permanent easements from property owners for where our new pipe locations are. Phase 3 was kind of shows all those little areas, area A, B, C, D, and it just kind of shows you the lineal footage of some instances new storm pipe or some instances new sanitary pipe and the area of pavement. And I know those drawings on the handouts aren't as well, but we do have them up here on the boards. There's one of them in there, Ted, and all that. But an area AD, if you really look, there's, could be up to 1,400 parcels that we may need some kind of temporary or permanent easement. And again, this is just using aerial photographs, topographic maps, some LiDAR maps, trying to get a good concept of what can be accomplished with this, working with the city, and Chad and Larry have been very helpful with getting us some good information to help, get a good layout or concept plan. So the next slide. The next slide kind of shows you a little bit more on what we're thinking project budget is. And this is kind of, I guess, the real interesting one. And at the end of this, we'll have Tim come up and talk about financing. So phase 1, and I think Larry was even talking, there's an opportunity to maybe use this more as some local funds instead of going after some grants or loans. But the project budget for this would be, around that 5 million. If we had to add a pump station, could be looking at $1 million. And then what Larry was saying, adding that storm sewer to go back to intercept a lot of that, to eliminate some of the local flooding that's happening south near the river, south of the railroad tracks. So about altogether, that could be in the range of 5 to 7 million. Phase 2, which is Blake's Branch, is about that same 6.5 million. And then the next 3 phases just kind of lay out for each one of those areas for the next, what we're trying to accomplish by 2025. So total project budget is at $37 to $41 million to accomplish all of this within the next, I guess, 7-8 years.
And obviously, this is going to probably change at some point, given rising costs of materials and labor costs and things like that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is our best engineered judgment at this time with what we know. And until we start getting more surveys, some, on the street information, we could find some conflicts that we just didn't understand. I mean, may find some more houses that are built on top of the box, and the box is not maybe as structurally sound, or we need to do some other things. And with that, Tim, I guess I'll open the door for you, and then I'll come back and close.
Tim Oswald, Piper Jaffrey, work with the city for a long time.
So what I put together, taking from what they've gone through from here and then trying to take the numbers and say, all right, how can we afford this? And ultimately, what's this going to do to user rates?
Move that microphone so you speak right into it. There you go.
Thank you. I took the three phases and very, very rounded the numbers. If you'll notice, 8 million, 8 million, and 20. Close to what Randy just talked about, not exactly the same. And the one takeaway I want to caution you is nobody's designed anything. You know, there's design work that has to be done, and when it's done and there'll be a bidding climate, whatever that is at that time, will affect these numbers very, very much. And so this is a continuing process. And those are hard numbers for today. So then what I do is I scan down to the bottom, which I don't think you can see on the, thank you, there you go. And I simply say, all right, to your point, what's the inflation look like? And obviously the same caution, we don't know what inflation will be in the future, but we can reasonably assume that today's construction costs probably won't be the same 5 years from now, 10 years from now, et cetera. So I calculate what the inflation is in the cost of each of the projects. And then when we start the project, so for example, phase one of Blake's Branch would start in essentially 2020. And the inflationary cost of an $8 million project today is that project costs $8.5 million in 2020. So that becomes the number that I use for purposes of calculating debts and the other expenses. And then the table in the middle there, I try and pencil out over what time period would the project be built. So 3 years for phase one, 5 years for phase two, et cetera, so that we have some idea of what the cash needs to the city are going to be. And that becomes relevant when we talk about how much do we have to borrow versus can we pay cash for any of this. And this is a continuing evolution of numbers that have been prepared now for more than 10 years. So then from there, I go on to the next page. Thank you. There it is. And I'm illustrating the cash expenses at the top, Blake's Branch phase 1, 2, and 3. And then at the bottom, the sources that are coming in to pay for that project over the time. And then the very bottom, you'll see a kind of a running total or a surplus. And all I'm simply solving for at this junction is that the running surplus when we're done is essentially zero. Not hugely negative, not hugely positive either. That means that we would have the amount borrowed plus the city's cash contributions line up largely with the amount expended on the projects. So that's all this is, just a cash flow model. Funding options that you have available, of course, are sewer rental, sewer fees, local option sales tax, and the Westgate TIF. And so the sales tax, you have other commitments that you've made against the sales tax. And in very round numbers, it generates about 3.3 million or so a year. You use about $1.5 million or so of that for emergency street repairs. You've got some property tax relief. You've got some ongoing street repairs. And then you've got a bond issue from 4 years ago that you're paying part of the issue. But if you were to choose to extend the tax, you would have some borrowing capacity against the sales tax, probably starting in 2021. And I calculated out that you could borrow $8.5 million. I think it's probably a little closer to 10 when we get all said and done, but I wanted to be a little cautious. Now, this is where I pause and say, the tax expires in 2024 under the current ballot. And so if you choose to use the sales tax to help pay for parts of the next round of projects, we need to be talking about getting in front of the voters and getting an extension of that tax. And we need to be talking about doing that sometime in the next 12 to 18 months. So much sooner than you were thinking, perhaps. But in order to have capacity to help out with these projects, we need to nail down the extension of that sales tax quicker. Okay, I'll skip over this page if you don't mind. Just real quickly, the Westgate TIF area is an option to fund part of the project as well. You amended the urban renewal plan, gosh, 5, 6, 7 years ago for this specific purpose of addressing these CSO projects out of TIF to the extent TIF was available. Your commitments in the Westgate TIF are fast diminishing. They'll be fairly low in 2 years. So it's an opportune time to add some debt to the Westgate TIF, which would then allow you to not have to use sewer fees to pay for it. These are decisions the mayor and council will get to make. But I want to make sure that you're aware. And we think that Westgate TIF could probably support around $7.5 million or so. So in very round numbers, you could pay for phase 1 of Blake's Branch out of the TIF. Doing okay so far? Okay, so so go back one page if you don't mind. Thank you. So there's 3 scenarios that I've prepared. There's infinite numbers of other scenarios that you may come up with after we're done talking. But the scenarios that I've come up with are pay for all of the upcoming improvements out of sewer rental fees. Scenario 2 is pay for use sewer rental fees and lost. And then scenario 3 is use sewer rental fees, lost, and TIF to pay for it. And each one has a cost, but also has an implication on the average user and the revenues needed to increase. So the first one, no loss, no TIF. This is a very simple summary of your much more complicated sewer utility with revenues, expenses, the debt laid in where it would be incurred, surpluses, running cash balance, revenue increases necessary, and then the impact on the typical user, which I think we said is 5 units. 5. So shoot.
Just one quick question, I don't mean to interrupt. So it's fair to say that first one where it says no Westgate TIF, no lost, that's strictly where it shows the 11% appeals on 2.5. Right. That one is pure sewer fees.
Correct, pure sewer fees. Yeah. So this sets the baseline. If we contribute no lost, if we use no TIF, none of the creative options that might be available, what will we have to charge in sewer rates to undertake the projects? And if 5 units is $38.25 today, that 5 units 8 years from now will be $75. You're going to basically double your rates over 8 years to pay for the project. Now, I did a series of 11% increases and then an 8 and then drop back to 2.5. The 2.5 is basically just inflationary. Just covers cost of living adjustments and chemicals and payroll and everything else. There's no real art to these numbers. I mean, I just kind of play around with the numbers and try and make sure that the cash balances are appropriately positive, and that you have reasonable bond coverage in each instance. Now, I need to pause for a moment. Revenue increase and rate increase are 2 different things, and I want to cover that real quick if you don't mind. In a revenue increase model, I'm simply calculating how much revenue we need next year. And I'm not passing judgment on how we will apply that revenue over the user mix. And what I'm talking about is the difference between base and per 1,000 gallon or per cubic foot user fees. And I've been in cities where I've been yelled at, perhaps, but talk too sternly about the difference between the two, and there are very strong public opinions on whether one should charge base or flow-based fees. And you can have a good argument on either side of this. My only caution would be, from my vantage point alone, I want to make sure the city has money to pay its debts and operate its system. And so that's my mindset, and that would be any increase would go on the base, because that way you're assured that the revenues will come in. Now, I get it when somebody says, hey, but that, will reward a user who uses a lot of water because they're not going to pay, quote unquote, pay as much. I get all that. I understand that. The flip side is if you stuck all of the revenue increase onto the per thousand on the user side of the equation, it gives people an incentive to conserve. And when people do take the steps to conserve, then you never achieve the revenue you set out to achieve, which then causes you to have to raise rates further again. So there is this philosophical discussion, and for purposes of this presentation, I'm ignoring it. That makes sense? Okay, so the second option, thank you. So this is sewer user fees and sales tax. And the sales tax, again, to remind you, I'm assuming would pay for about $8.5 million. So it'd pay for basically one of the first two phases of the Blake's Branch. This time the revenue increases drop from 11 down to 8, continue out similar number of years, and the average household bill goes from $38.25 to $63 a month. So lower, but still a significant increase in the average fee over the next 8 years. And then the third option, where we're trying to use any available option. So you've got TIF, you've got sales tax, and you've got sewer user fees. In this instance, we're talking about revenue increases of 7% a year, and a average household bill that goes from $38.25 to about $60. Am I doing okay so far? All right, so go ahead, Mayor.
No.
So a couple of observations that I have for you to consider. One is the folks from Veensta have mentioned a couple times the word grants. Nobody knows whether we're going into an environment where we will or won't have grants available, whether they're earmarks at the federal level or the state level. What we do know is we can learn from past grant processes, and that is that one of the things the grant reviewers tend to like are projects that are significantly designed and can be implemented quickly once the award of the grant has been made. So as you think about what parts of projects might be most attractive to a grant writer, you would try and find areas of the community where, or parts of the project where the community might be a more low income or more at-risk type of segment of the population. And then you would make sure that you undertook and designed the project, perhaps before you, quote unquote, are ready to build it, but just to make sure that you have grant. If a grant becomes available or an earmark becomes available, you're in line to receive it. The other observation I have is totally unrelated to grants, and that is if you're thinking about using TIF, I'll remind you, the prior council, that was part of how they wanted to pay for these projects. And in fact, you did pay for about half of the lagoon pump project using the Westgate TIF. The council took action at that time to amend the plan and make the necessary designations for that plan to use TIF. If you want to do that again, of course, the legislature has changed the rules as they do most years. And you would need now to amend the urban renewal plan and incorporate these projects into the plan It's a fairly simple process. It'll consume about 60 days or so of time. It's a legal process with the TIF planner and your attorneys. But I would advocate, I guess, that if you're thinking about using TIF, you're not obligating yourself, but if you're even thinking about it, get the plan amendments going and get those done this summer and fall so that you're in a position when the December certification comes around that you have approved the amendment. And if you want to certify for the projects, you'll be in a position to do so. Does that make sense? All right, Ted.
A couple ideas. First of all, in terms of grants, what the grant providers like to do is finish a job. And so the reason you've been so successful, like almost 70% of your monies has come from grants, your profile remains the same in terms of low income, in terms of hot lunch programs, a variety of things. And so as we work out the federal budget, wherever that ends up and whoever ends up as president, it is important to be part of the game. And so they like to finish what they start. The other part, when we look at, 11%, 8% increases on the average bill, there are several other options which past councils we've talked to you before about ways to generate more money from your existing rates. One is that we've actually been taken to task by EPA is that in terms of charging per unit for multifamily. Right now, if I have 150 units and I have one water meter, I pay one minimum. All you folks that live in your own house, that's inherently unequitable. Another one is that we've talked about stormwater utilities. We came close to passing it a few years ago. That may be worth revisiting. When we take a look at our industrial users and we look at the cost to treat a pound of their pollutants, we are woefully short for where we should be. Now, there's political implications, there's employment. I understand all of that. Another one that we might want to look at is there's franchise fees. Again, you need to take a look at positive and negatives, but all we're suggesting is that once the numbers start coming out and you start looking at what the cost might be to the average consumer, there's things you can do and you probably should look at would generate, I always tell them, it's gold in the basement kind of thing, but I would suggest that you look at those. And another one that most cities will do is that your restaurants, your car washes and such, even though they're going to pay on water use, their consumption of the organics is 2, 3, 4 times as much as a homeowner, yet they only pay on water use, and yet they consume more of your plant in terms of capacity. All those things, as we work our way through this, and it's nothing you have to decide tonight, but if you tell Tim and tell me and our crew, look at this, we can certainly do that. But those are some ideas for you.
So I know we're getting to the end of our time, so I'll just kind of quickly go through the last couple slides. I'm going to go to the next one. Next. So this, you have a slide in there for schedule to make that compliance schedule of 2025. Starting design, is kind of a process of one project, getting it under construction. While that's under construction, starting the design of the next project and so forth. So kind of gives you a idea of the design and what's involved with the design from, state historic preservation review, wetland, if we got any contaminated sites, easements, etc. But just want to give you a schedule. And then the last slide, because I know Larry wants a couple things. What we want the council to consider is applying for a DNR SRF planning and design loan. A lot of advantages to that. Ted can even probably fill you more, but it's 3 years without interest, and it just helps us launch into the design of these projects. And then the next one we would want is if without how the funding goes, if we want to go for an SRF construction loan, I believe you can roll this right into that. So with that, I just wanted to let you know, we want you to consider that in the May meeting. We'll bring this to your attention that the deadline is June 1st for DNR for this SRF planning and design loan. So we need to.
Things you have to do, if it's an SRF or if it's a federal grant, there are certain federal requirements that are distinctly different than funding it on your own. And so all of those sort of things, the historical review, the examining sites, the wetlands information, geotech, easements, as I said, we identified potentially 1,700 parcels, of which I hope we can get it down to 500. But a parcel might cost as much as 2,500, not including what you might have to pay for it. So that is a significant amount of money, and that's one that it's chicken and the egg problem. You have to do the design before you can figure out what you want for construction easements and permanent easements. But that's one that we've talked to Lori and staff about. How do we keep that cost under control? And maybe that's maybe the city hire someone to do that. But that's what B&K is here. I have a distinct. My concern always is the small repair and how that's going to work out. And so all of those things. And so the planning design loan, since it is a loan, if you don't use it, you don't pay it back. So if you have, we've talked about what, $4 million or whatever it might be. It seems like a huge number, but if you don't use it, you don't have to pay it back.
The interest.
Well, interest once it gets
once
it gets to construction. But so that's as Tim showed you, there's some opportunities for the private side and also some of this other funding. But remember that when we go to something that has federal hooks and it's needed to have federal hooks, there's a different cost. So we can work through that. But you can see that it doesn't include easement negotiation or acquisition. It doesn't include construction services. It doesn't include what the water utility wants to do. But we want to get out in front, and what you have to do if you want to get on the list, I would think in May we have to have a resolution to enter into the program.
With that, I'll turn it over to Larry, but our staff here will be here if you guys have any questions. So thank you.
So one of the things that we know that we have to do this from a regulatory standpoint, and what Ted had been alluding to is the funding sources that come with different requirements. One of the things that we can do if we continue to use the TIF, which would be our recommendation from our office, would be to start on the phase 1, which is the main line basically from Birch and Main all the way to the plant. That's something that we can fund locally, and in the financial models that was presented to you, that was incorporated into that last sewer rate. So we could actually start construction because this is this does have a completion date of December of 25. And again, that sounds like a lot of time, but when you start looking at all these items that we have to accomplish, this thing's not working very good. There's a lot of permitting, a lot of time. So our recommendation and what I would bring forth to you is probably twofold. The first one is a small contract to allow us to get this information application together and get it on the intended use plan before we can start the design loan process. Also a design contract to do phase 1 along with funding that just locally. We would start the process to update the TIF district. And the reason we can do that, I don't know how obvious it was, that debt will be falling off and we can transfer that amount of funds to do this project. So that's what we'll be bringing back to council for actual action items.
Any questions for Larry or Ted? And Ted, I think it goes without saying, you were very modest. V&K works all over the state of Iowa, and you've been actively involved with us, you said, since 2004. So this is not new work or something that you are not familiar with. Okay.
I do want to make one more point, and it's more for the public. I want them to understand that this is just our compliance schedule. That's December of 2036. There's still a lot of work to be done after that. You still have a collection system that's aging. You still have a lot of I&I issues that is part of the phase 10. But then you also, we've only addressed the public side. There is a private side. That means roof leaders, footing drains, laterals that leak. That will be initiated at some point. We know some of our areas have issues with those items. That'll be rolled in at the same time. At some point, we'll have to come back, create a program. Each city's different on how they handle that. But that will be coming to a theater near you in the next few years to handle those areas. I do want to point out phase 5, which was the north side interceptor box. We did clean that. We was very successful. Got some grant funding for that. We've been monitoring joints, making joint repairs. At some point, we will have to go back. We originally had programmed that for a $10 million project. We cleaned it for slightly under $500,000. We're getting ready to do some more joint repairs. But I would I would wager that at the end of this 8-year process, we will be back doing something, if it's a lining project, some sort of reconstruction on that. So we're not going to run out of projects.
And Mayor, I'd like to, Steve, you have some thoughts on Steve's be part of our team. And the work we've done for you in the past, I'll be first to admit that I think the communication could be better. And so Steve's with us, and he comes from the background, some very large projects. In terms of quality control, contract change orders and communication, and how this might all come together. So Steve, you have some thoughts for us?
No. No, I don't, I mean, I think what you got presented tonight was pretty good, pretty thorough. You know, your comment of these are today's dollars. There's a lot of things here. This is a big project. Our team's in place. Mayor, you've recognized that we've been here for a while. We're going to continue to do a great job for you. We've added some things in our arsenal to make it even go better. And so I think that you got some pretty sharp people working on this, on the engineering side, the financial side, your staff. And I'll assure you that it'll go well. So thank you.
One last thought, the north area, we talked about, you know, this is always a matter of selling it to our citizens. The north area, as long as I've been down here, we've talked about annexation, we've talked about doing this, we've talked about doing that. This is going to force us to sit down and think about what we need to have for industries, development in that area, so we can certainly handle the wastewater and the stormwater. One of the aspects of the SRF loans, about 10% of that can be put into a demonstration project, and that might be such things I like to fish. So maybe in that uncontrolled watershed, we build a large fishing pond, which helps us monitor the amount of water that can come down the CSO. Certainly bike trails, some of the things, and I've looked at your parks plan and such, and I know you have a lot of ground you got to take care of now. But this divisioning, now you can sit there and say, no, this is part of the process. Also, the neighborhoods, think about what happens if I have a paved street out in front of my house now, and I have a brand new sewer system, storm sewer system. A lot of these things that, you know, through economic issues, we haven't been able to undertake. That's something to really explain to people that, yeah, your sewer rates are going to go up, but there's a lot of positives that come out of a project of this size. As I said, you know, 230 blocks, that's a big undertaking. And so we talk about, you know, by 2025, and I can assure you, once the final dollars are starting to be put together, we will have a talk with the DNR about can we extend a couple of years, because the revenue generator, the loss, the TIF, if we can buy some time, then we have a better situation financially. So all those things, and as I said, I've watched this council and mayors go to DC, negotiate, put your hat in the ring for grants. And folks, that's all part of it. We were successful getting Burlington, Iowa, $17 million in the Tiger grant. But if you don't try, you're not going to do it. So.
Okay, I think Hala had a question.
I was just wondering, for getting on the planning and design loan, what would be the timeline from doing that to having like preliminary designs and cost estimates, knowing kind of a grant timeline schedule from there?
What happens, Holly, is June 1st, you don't know from EPC until September. What we're trying to do, and I can give Larry some ideas of things we could try to do this summer. Some of it might be geotech, some of it might be trying to figure out easement acquisition. We're trying to shoot for a 2020 construction. Now, things are out of our control. It's the permitting process, but you know, our review with the historical. But that's kind of, so it was, hopefully we can get it started in September, then when we get the approval. So rather than, you know, the question is, we want to use our own money for phase one, which I think we're going to try to do. But you also, if you have a plan design in place, you can make a decision what's most appropriate.
Okay, good question, Holly. Are there questions for any of the staff or any of the visiting? Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to put in context, I know we talked about this earlier this afternoon, and that's other potential revenue sources. If you go back and look and just compare, obviously the sewer fees, if you just make that your first plant, As Tim pointed out, I come out with an average of about 8.5% increase. If you take it down to utilizing TIF, Westgate TIF and lost, it shrinks to about, all things being equal, I just took an average, about 5.88. So two questions. One would be, just as you said, there would be additional monies. This may be a Tim and a Bob question. There may be additional monies, as Ted indicated, that you could, quite frankly, thrust against this project and help lower your capital costs. So that's certainly something to consider, and that's again a legislative decision. These are all points well taken. So that's one dragon to slay, as it were. But the other one would be, and this is just a question of, quite frankly, more along the lines of maintenance. And that is, in addition to the projects that have been outlined tonight, you still have debt that you're trying to retire. Bob J. in the finance department can put a certain amount of money against the project. And again, that's a great idea, but not to rain on anybody's hit parade, but just remember these rates, and I don't know that we know that yet, but these rates, if they're going to capitalize not only these projects, but continue to fund some of the smaller projects, that average may be higher, just quite frankly, because you're talking more money.
Any comment and I'll ask you to step to the microphone. I just got a text that audience at home cannot hear you if you're not in front of the microphone. So if anybody speaks, come to the microphone.
I think one of the things I want to point out, they went through and did the proposals for different options on our funding. What we did last time was we set up that schedule. As we got grants and we were successful, we were able to lower that toward the end of the pro forma. So that'd be the same thing. You have to set up, you have to cover your projects and your debt with known sources. And then as you get grants, then you can adjust. Last time, what we did was 3 years straight, and then we come back and I think we lowered it from 15 to 8. And I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. That would be the same plan here if we're successful, if there are grant programs available. Then we'd take advantage of them.
Okay.
Your Honor, I got a quick question.
Go ahead, Matt.
I think you just covered it there. So say the scenario number 3 where we use sewer revenue, lost local option sales tax and TIF monies. And say we're successful in getting, say, let's just throw out there, since we're talking a lot of hypothetical situations, a 50% grant coverage. I mean, we're getting 70 now, but let's say it isn't so good in the next several years. When that gets applied to the cost of the project, will it be the sewer rates or the sewer revenues or the fees that get adjusted to reflect those savings, or will it be some other part of that financing package?
It would be the requested amount of the increase. Like I said, I think last time we waited 3 years to come back, we knew that, and then we lowered the amount. Say that it was 8.5%, it might go to 5%.
So we adjusted the sewer fees down then,
right,
when we got grants.
Right.
Okay, that's just the only question I had.
Yeah. In the I know at least in the CDBG, you have to say what your sewer rates are if you get it and if you don't get it. So essentially, you're supposed to apply that to that.
Right.
One thing you'll have to remember that once whatever line of financing we take, we get on board, we're on board the train for the whole route of it. You can't be looking at a lot of other things that are out there that you previously think we can, like for local option, it won't be available. Because for every dollar, we're going to try to throw as much as we possibly can at this project to save in financing costs and to borrow. So it'll be slim pickings down the road here. But once we get on the path, you got to stay on the path.
Mayor, just one question, somewhat to follow up on the finance part. I know that the subject was raised about approving a franchise tax. Now, this may be, it's something for you to not want to put you on the spot, but let's just back up a little bit. In the spring of 2016, the franchise fee or tax was something that staff considered. And one of the challenges to that, as I recall, and working with the city attorney and Bob J at the time, was if we do that, then you have let's just say a bit of an issue with the manufacturers in town. As you know, Iowa law allows for that exemption on those items that are, quite frankly, exempt from taxation. So that would be gone. I'm not trying to set aside a franchise. I know that is an option. Have there been other communities in the state then that have used as a financing tool a franchise tax?
Yes, the short answer is yes. And I can name one community that is using it for, you and I would call paving. I suspect it's curb to curb, storms, sanitary, and water together. And I know a different community that used a franchise fee, the electric and gas franchise fee, to pay for a police station. And I don't do real detailed research. Those are just ones I happen to know because I know the staff and, to talk to them about it. But yes, I'd hope you would at least consider that as a funding option among the others on the list. And I understand there are politics involved in all of these discussions.
Thank you.
Ted, would you comment a little bit more? You gave us 4 items in terms of the things we ought to consider, and one of them was unit cost for heavier use.
Yeah.
Are other cities, can you give us some comparative data like,
sure,
our sister cities, Burlington, Marshalltown,
Right.
Fort Dodge?
What happens is that when we build wastewater plants, we look at the flow component, and maybe 50% of that construction is for flow. The other 50% is reduction of organics, the pollutants. And we always, we base it around a domestic use. And so BOD, which is just kind of a barometer, we set that at about 200 to 240 milligrams per liter. What happens with most restaurants, and especially if they have some really good greasy food, car washes, there's a variety of other things that actually contribute a lot more than that, but they only pay on water sales. And so you may have a restaurant that's consuming as much as 5 times more than a resident, but they're only paying as if they were a resident. And so we've done several of them. A lot of the cities are beginning to look at it, and especially, you see, when you have a industrial pretreatment program, it's based on strength and it's also based on flow. Well, we charge them more because they use more of our plant. We don't carry forward on that in terms of restaurants and others. And most of these, especially the chain restaurants, they do it throughout the United States and they're used to it. I know that like in, I think we looked at it, Larry, and I think we did a quick and dirty, it was about 150,000 increase in revenue, really by not even charging the full amount, but just textbook. That's one thing. Certainly stormwater utility, we've been through it before. We've been down the path. A lot of the legwork is done. You can see that a lot of cities have instituted it. In some cases, and Andy had a good suggestion that, and Des Moines started this way, they said, we're just going to charge $1 per unit. And the unit is the impervious side, roofs and driveways and such on a residential basis, just to get it kicked off. Well, it worked fine until we had the floods that almost wiped out River Point, and they realized we have a lot more stormwater work to do, which again, CSOs is eligible, than we can actually collect in revenues. And so I would suggest, and we started this before, you take the people, sometimes it's nonprofits, might be schools, churches, big box stores, and you have a conversation with them about, this is what I have on my plate, and this is what I have for road use tax, general fund. I'm not going to be able to get all these things done if I don't do something differently. And the reality gets to be, so if you want to try to diminish the increase in cost for the resident on wastewater, even though their charge might be a couple of dollars a month, because you have more people coming to the party, theirs stays much more level, and you don't have to have the 8%, the 11%. Same thing on the multifamily. It's pretty straightforward. Most people don't really understand how that works. And you might have maybe mobile home park, but they have 150 units and they pay 3 bases. To me, that doesn't seem equitable. Mm-hmm. And then the other one, we have looked at it before, and you guys know this. We don't want to drive away industry. We don't want to eliminate jobs. But there's some reality here. Whoever has to make up the difference is usually the small user. And so when you look at what it takes what it costs for me to produce and treat a pound of BOD, and I'm charging 26 cents and it costs me $1, then somebody has to make up the difference. And then when you add more to the mix in terms of projects, it becomes even more onerous. And so those 3 things, those 4 things, the franchise fee, Tim understands is a lot more. I've watched some cities, Des Moines, which is the notorious example, they're still paying that back. But what they didn't do, They didn't show that there was real costs involved. That's really the letter of the law. You have to prove that you need to charge for this. But all these sort of things, and as we kind of wade through this, a very complex project and multi-term, that we need to maybe keep our minds open about, should we look at this, see what impact it does make? Because, and again, if you tell me I'm interested in protecting jobs and the little person, yeah, there's certainly some ways you can do that, Mayor.
Just keep hogging this. One other item, and Larry, if you would comment on this a little bit, if you don't mind, and that is the discussion we had this afternoon about rates. I've been with the city about 2.5 years now, and I don't think we've increased the sewer rates at all. So the advantage is, as Ted pointed out, is that you don't create a financial burden on your residents. But when everyone who said, you hear people say, government should be run like a business. Well, a business covers its expenses, and we have to cover our expenses. But it will be a change. Having said all that, we should be increasing those rates on an annual basis, and I'll participate and fall on the sword on that one. If we are to engage in this process, then is increasing those sewer rates set in the schedules here. Will that be something that, as you said, council will have to stay on that path if we're going to capitalize those expenses? I just feel really strongly we probably should be increasing those sewer rates. That's all I have.
No, that would be correct. We would do the same process we did last time. Again, I think that we weren't as aggressive on the rates because we were very fortunate in the number of grants. So it offset what we had to do, but you should have at least your O&M average cost increased annually. We have not increased the rates since 2013.
Thank you.
Okay. Speak to the microphone, please.
If we choose to take a look at phase 1 and phase 2 and try to do it out of local funds, which means that we're not going to have the same requirements as SRF or grants. And so if we decided in midstream that suddenly we're not going to do that, even though my deadline doesn't change, I may spend another year or 2 years getting caught up trying to comply with the federal requirements. And so, yeah, pick a path, stick with the path, and you can see what's generating. There's a considerable amount of you can do with local dollars and not have the hooks that you have with the grants.
And one of the reasons, if we started within this year, early summer, that would still, we'd be very fortunate if we could go to construction with phase 1 in 2020. One of the things we have to look at is how disruptive this project's going to be. I mean, we're looking at taking out Main Street from Birch all the way to Iowa Avenue and then down Iowa Avenue. And we know kind of the impacts. If that's the final route, we're going to look at a couple different options. Then we turn around on the phase, probably phase 3, where we tear out Jefferson. So there's a lot of the major corridors that will be disrupted under this. So we need to spread the construction over multiple years. And that, again, is why we're starting right now.
Any other questions or any other comments?
Your Honor, I got a comment, just a final word. I know we're really early in the process and there's a lot of unknowns here in this. And thank you for your work, Ted. I appreciate it. And Larry, for all the years of work you put into this project. And it's not, we're halfway maybe through from what you said tonight. There's a lot of future things we got to look at even after this is done. Mm-hmm. I would just ask that, we know who's going to end up paying for this if we don't look at any other options, the small ratepayer, like Ted had said. And we've got other options that have been addressed tonight. And as we move forward, I would just ask that we look at each and every one of them because we know who's going to get stuck with the bill if we do nothing. I think there's options here that we have to look at before we just say, okay, 11% sewer rates every year. I agree with Administrator Morris. We have to cover our expenses. I don't think anybody up here is living in fantasy land. We know that sewer rates are going to go up. But my vote will come when we look at each one of these individually and make sure it's equitable for everybody. That includes multifamily units with 1 meter. That's got to change. That's not fair to the small ratepayer. So if we can look through those and find things that'll work, I know we've got to cover our costs and move forward. It's kind of a sad reality, really, but I just hope we remain equitable to everybody who's using on the system. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Any other comments or questions? Well, then I assume, Andy, that staff will be busy making some recommendations to come back to us in May, and we have some deadlines that if we're going to apply for these things, we'll have to get done by June. So we'll look forward to the recommendations from staff.
We'll move forward on.
Okay. Okay. Anything else, fellows? Anybody else in the audience connected? Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. At this time, I would ask if there's anyone in the audience who wants to address an item not on the agenda. Any information good for city council? Step to the microphone, please. Introduce yourself.
Matt Brush with Eyes and Ears. And I just wanted to give the council, because we upgraded the sound in here. It's been a long process, and I've been meaning to say something, and tonight's what's long. I had no idea that my crap was this complicated, so I'm sorry that this meeting went so long. But I'll try to keep this short. But we 2 years ago started trying to upgrade the sound in here, and we had an issue that the sound equipment was 40 years old, and the TV signal that was going to go TV was analog. And which basically, to explain this to somebody who doesn't understand analog and digital, the old TVs that were in our big boxes and they're square were analog, and now everything's widescreen, like your flat screen at home is digital. And it took a while, and there was a lot of processes. We had to do acoustical panels in here, upgrade the speaker system. The sound and videos all ran off of an iPad so that any dummy could do it. Not that any dummy can, because it still gets complicated sometimes. But the last piece of the puzzle has taken us a while, because we got Legacy involved to run fiber from here down to MediaCom. And so the equipment in here has been upgraded for a long time. Everything in here was digital probably a year ago, and it's just taken us a while to get Legacy, to get the fiber to the high school and then back down to MediaCom. And I can say as of about 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, that fiber got hooked up. We are now completely digital inside City Hall, and we are digital at home, and we've got a much better quality image at home. I get a lot of comments about the sound being a lot better as long as we step up to the microphone. But the picture is way better. And I will tell you that TV, because I get people asking me all the time, that TV is like the TV that sits at your home. It is literally 20 seconds behind, because it's just a different, I don't want to go into the technical, but if I raise my hand right now, it does not go up. And in about 20 seconds, you'll see my hand go up. So council, don't pay attention to that at any time, because it lags behind, which is good, because when we get a crazy up here, we can shut it off and nobody will see the crazy. So that's good. The last thing, so the project is pretty much done. We need to clean up cables here and clean up some equipment. But I would like to just mention that I think, and I've never really talked to anybody about this, but as a citizen, I think that the channel is really underutilized. I think we could do more announcements of things that goes on with the city. Like last year for Fly Iowa, we did an announcement where the mayor media came and we broadcasted it live. And I would encourage you guys, now that it's fully digital, we got really nice cameras, that to be thinking about what things can we utilize this for besides just 24/7 music and ads, announcements, of things that the city's going on. Live announcements is what I'm talking about. But we haven't really discussed that the project's done and that this all came together. So I just wanted you to know that everything's done. It's all digital. It seems to be working. It's worked the last 2 or 3, works perfectly. So that's a good thing. Finally, government has accomplished something, I guess, is the period at the end of the sentence. Yeah, I did. I stared right at you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We appreciate that update, and it is good to have the system working as it was designed. So if there's anything else, any other comments you want to bring to the attention of the council? If not, I'd entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Berg?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Thank you. 6:59.